Hello, my dear friends. You're in the Military Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in the world on the 22nd of May of 2026. Today we have lots of very interesting updates, so let's start. And first, we're going to talk about the conflict on the territory of Ukraine, and it seems that it's happening. The major battle of the entire special military operation begins. Now, both the Russians and the Ukrainians use all means they have for the purpose to defeat each other or to deal significant damage to each other. We have lots of interesting updates that tell us just about one thing. Both the Russians and the Ukrainians began the major battle of not just 2026 but of the entire conflict on the territory of Ukraine. So let's start discussing everything in details, and most likely in coming days we'll see lots of things, and we'll see the thing by the name of a total war between Russians and the Ukrainians. So let's start, and the most important update that we have already discussed, just a few more things about the situation. The Russians, as a result of clashes, established complete control over the settlement by the name of Verkhnia Tersa, which is located in the eastern Zaporozhye direction. One of the most important settlements was captured by Russians, and we have proofs. This video was published by pro-Russian sources, and here we can see once again how exactly the Russians were fighting for this settlement. As a result of clashes, the Russians established complete control, and later this information was also confirmed by both the Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation and the Group of Forces East. In this video we can see at least 5 flags were raised by Russians, and this is something like a signal. This is something like the beginning of the major battle of 2026. The Russians managed to penetrate the main defenses of the armed forces of Ukraine in this area, and most likely in coming days will receive similar reports from the settlements of Gulyayi-Polskaya, Vozdvizhenka, and once again from the settlement of Rizdvyanka. And then Russians, using broad frontline attack, will begin offensive operation in the western direction with the purpose to attack the city of Zaporozhye from the east, to attack the settlement of Orikhiv and the Orikhiv agglomeration, and to attack, of course, the settlement of Tavriyska. And the Ukrainians also understand the situation. They understand that the Russians managed to break through the most important defense line in this area, so that is why the Ukrainians don't have any other option but to counter-attack and to counter-strike the Russians. And starting on the second half of May of 2026, the Ukrainians intensified their drones activities along the main supply line M14 between the cities of Melitopol and Rostov-on-Don. The road M14 is one of the most important roads in the southern direction through the area between the Kherson and the Zaporozhye and Donetsk regions. And this is the road. The Russians have modified this road since the beginning of the special military operation. The Russians added additional lines, the Russians improved logistics, and this road is a very important one because the Russians use this road to supply and support their contingents in the area of the city of Donetsk. The Russians are using this road to supply their forces there. The Russians use this road to support their contingent in the area of the city of Tokmak, and then further in the northern direction towards the line of combat contact. The Russians use this road to support and supply their contingent in the area of the city of Kherson. So this is one of the most important logistics arteria, and these days we start receiving lots of updates from the area of how Ukrainians establish complete fire control over the territory. We can't call it as a complete fire control, but the Ukrainians established a very big control over these territories, and lots of updates were reported. Ukraine drone forces continue massive middle strikes against key roads across southern Ukraine, targeting multiple trucks far from the front line. On this map are only the 64 geolocated trucks hit outside the kill zone. Multiple other ones are not geolocated. This information was published by a pro-Western source and by a pro-Western expert. Another important video. And here we can see a Russian vehicle moving along M14 road, and here we can see how the Ukrainians, as a result of attack, destroyed another truck that was used by Russians to support their forces. Here we can see a fuel truck that most likely was destroyed by the armed forces of Ukraine as a result of drone attack. And here we can see a video with a drone that was trying to hit a vehicle of the military forces of the armed forces of the Russian Federation, but something went wrong. Probably the Russians used their electronic warfare equipment, and as a result of let's say active actions from this electronic warfare equipment, this drone lost its road and was moved further in the west, further to the left, and destroyed somewhere in the sky over this supply line. So this is the moment when the Russians began using their electronic warfare equipment. In this video we can see a summary of attacks that the Ukrainians have carried out probably since the beginning of May. Lots of episodes were recorded along M14 road. A lot of vehicles were destroyed. Russia is shutting the Rostov-Crimea road for civilian traffic after multiple Ukrainian strikes hit this critical road. More strikes are also hitting the Mariupol-Donetsk highway. Right now, all the road corridor to Crimea is threatened. Another important area, another important video. Here we can see civilians moving along this Mariupol-Melitopol road, and here we can see a Ukrainian drone that was flying over this area seeking for a target. As you can see, this drone doesn't suffer and doesn't face any resistance from the Ukrainian, from the Russian side. In this video we can see another episode of the consequences of attack. A vehicle was completely destroyed as a result of the Ukrainian attack. And in this video, for example, we can see another logistic line, another logistic road between the cities of Mariupol and Donetsk. And here we can see how Ukrainians using drones were attacking Russian military vehicles that were moving along this area. As you can see during this video, lots of episodes were recorded. The Ukrainians began these attacks in this area right at the moment when the Russians broke through Ukraine's defense through the eastern Zaporozhye direction. Now the Ukrainians are just with one thing: to destroy as many as possible vehicles, to destroy as many as possible fuel trucks, and so on, with the purpose not to allow the Russians to get additional reinforcements, reserves, munition, weapons and arms and forces, fresh forces, in the direction of the city of Orikhiv, in the direction of the Zaporozhye direction. Of course, we can't say that this is already a collapse or the end of the Russian offensive. It's the beginning of a major battle. The Ukrainians see that the Russians launched their major offensive operation, and right at the moment when the Russians launched their major offensive operation, the Ukrainians are trying to establish complete control over this territory. And the Ukrainians began preparation before this operation a long time ago. Since the beginning of March, we have received significant number of videos from this area, and here through these videos we can see just one thing: how Ukrainians were attacking trains, how Ukrainians were attacking air defense forces of the armed forces of the Russian Federation, how Ukrainians were destroying raiders, how these Ukrainians were trying to suppress and to destroy the air defense capabilities of Russians in this area. And the Ukrainians were focused on this operation, have been focused on this operation probably even since the beginning of this year, because it seems that Ukrainians knew plans of Russians and they were trying to prepare themselves before the beginning of this major battle. Anyway, let's wait and see what is going to happen next. Obviously, the Russians have obviously a plan B for this situation, because if the Russians don't have a plan B, and if the Russians are not able to secure this Rostov-on-Don Melitopol road, then of course this can lead to some problems for the Russian side. But it seems that the Russians indeed have a plan B, and we are talking about massive missile attacks, massive drone attacks, and probably use of new weapons and new missiles against the Ukrainian authorities. Today we received lots of interesting statements on this matter. Let's discuss them in details. Now let's move to the Luhansk region. During the previous 24 hours, the Ukrainians attacked the city of Starobilsk. So this is the settlement, the city of Starobilsk, which is located basically in the northern or even in the central part of the Luhansk region. And according to information we have, the Ukrainians attacked a college. So in this video we can see the consequences of attack. Later, the president of the Russian Federation stated that the Ukrainians used 16 drones to attack this object of civilian infrastructure, and as a result of this attack, as you can see, the building was almost completely reduced to ruins. And the most important thing, that the Russians didn't have possibilities to start a rescue operation. And when the Russians started, and every time the Russians started a rescue operation, there was a threat that Ukrainians would make another attack in this area, and the Russians were always forced to stop the rescue operation and then to begin everything, and then to start everything from the beginning. The situation is critical at the moment when this article was published. At least 3 people were rescued from the rubble of dormitory in Starobilsk after a strike. According to pro-Russian sources, this attack was carried out by the Ukrainians. And so this is something that the Russian authorities, Putin, used to blame Ukraine's Zelensky and the Ukrainian authorities, and to threaten the Ukraine's authorities with responsibilities and with retaliatory strike. Let's discuss the statement that were made by Russians. Vladimir Putin addressed Ukrainian servicemen with a call not to carry out criminal orders of the illegitimate and corrupt junta. Otherwise, you yourselves become complices to these crimes, the Russian president emphasized. Another important thing, Russia has requested an emergency meeting of the United Nations Security Council in connection with the attack by the Ukrainian armed forces on the dormitory in Starobilsk, according to the Russian permanent mission. Another important statement, a monstrous crime. This is how the Russians call this situation. Another statement made by Putin, 6 people. The losses are 6 people as a result of strike on college in Starobilsk, and 15 are listed as missing, which means that they're most likely below the ruins. The strike on the college in Starobilsk was not accidental. 16 drones attacked the same location in 3 waves, Putin stated. There are no grounds to claim that the drones hit the dormitory because they were shot down or deviated from their course, the president emphasized. There are no military facilities, intelligence service sites, or related infrastructure near the college that was attacked in Starobilsk. Another important thing, the president of Russia ordered the Ministry of Defense to present proposals for response to the Ukraine armed forces attacked the college on the territory of Luhansk region. So most likely in coming hours the Russians will strike back, and probably and most likely the Russians will use new missiles, and most likely Russians will attack decision-making centers through the territory of Ukraine. And several hours later, the Ukrainians published a very interesting statement. Ukrainians stated that they has nothing common with this attack. The General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine confirmed the missile strike on the building of a college and dormitory in Starobilsk, calling them Rubicon's headquarters. The Ukrainians are saying that when they were attacking these buildings, there were no civilians, there were no students and so on. There were Rubicon forces, Rubicon's headquarters. And the Ukrainians are saying that they attacked and destroyed the headquarters of this unit. So this is the situation. The Russians most likely will strike back, but most likely the Russians will strike back right after the end of the UN Security Council, when most likely the members, at least some members of these councils, will reject any blames from the Russian side, and only then the Russians will attack. And once again, most likely the Russians will attack decision-making centers. And now we see that the Russians are intensifying their activities, the Russians erasing any limits in front of them. They will attack hard. And this is the reason, probably another reason, why Zelensky has conflict with the president of the Republic of Belarus and with Belarusians, because Zelensky understands that during these massive attacks and major offensive operation from the Russian side, if something begins from the north, most likely Zelensky will not have enough of forces to stabilize the situation. So this is the situation, and most likely we are at the beginning of something much bigger than we used to see. An offensive, according to pro-Ukrainian sources, an offensive from Belarus is possible in the fall, according to the Ukrainian sources. Kiev sources are describing possible scenarios: a renewed attempt at an offensive on Kiev, creation of a buffer zone in the Chernihiv region, pressure on Ukraine through the threat of an offensive from the north, withdrawal of Ukrainian forces from Donbas, attacks from Belarus-Bryansk region. So let's wait and see what is going to happen next, but obviously these first days of this major offensive operation for the Russian side are very important ones, and they will determine the end and the middle and the end part of this major battle. Meanwhile, during the previous 24 hours, the Russians attacked the city of Nikolaev with drones. Powerful explosions were recorded through the settlement. Also, the Russians were attacking the cities of Kharkiv and the northern regions of Ukraine. The Russians attacked the city of Sumy with a regular FPV drone, and in this video we can see how a Russian FPV drone was attacking an object of energy infrastructure in the northern parts of the city of Sumy. Here we can see a fiber optic drone was moving in the direction of this object, of this facility, and then the Russians attacked this territory. The Ukrainians were trying to prepare to create a shelter, but we see that this didn't help the Ukrainians to save this object of energy infrastructure. Now let's move further. We have covered most of the updates regarding the Zaporozhye direction. The eastern front line has collapsed or about to collapse completely, and then Russians will continue moving further in the western direction, in the direction of the cities of Orikhiv, Tavriyska, Yurkovka, and of course the city of Zaporozhye itself. And as we discussed in the previous videos, the most important target for Ukrainians is to slow down the Russians and not to allow the Russians to cross this yellow line by the end of the year, more precisely before winter comes. So this is the most important thing, because if the Ukrainians are able to stop the Russians along this yellow line, this would mean that the battle for the city of Zaporozhye would be postponed for probably late spring of 2026. But if Russians are able to cross this yellow line before winter comes, then most likely the Russians will continue their assault operations through the city of Zaporozhye also during the winter period of time, which means that somewhere at the beginning of 2027, the city of Zaporozhye may fall in Russia's hands. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the Dobropolye direction. These days we have changes in this area as well. The Russians intensify their activities in the area of Grishina. We have changes on the ground based on the videos that were published by different sources. In these videos we can see how Ukrainians were attacking Russians, which means that the Russians managed to improve their positions and we adjusted the map. The Russians encircled the settlement of Belitska from the north, according to several sources. The Russians infiltrated this area with infantry and troops, and the Russians caught the settlement of Belitska in pincers. As for the Slaviansk-Kramatorsk direction, during the previous 12-24 hours, we haven't received lots of updates. The Russians were bombing and attacking the cities of Kramatorsk, Slavyansk, and Konstantinovka with aviation, with bombs, but without changes on the ground. The only changes we have in this area is the area around the city of Liman. As for this direction, these days, we start receiving reports, especially from pro-Ukrainian sources, that the Ukrainians began a counter-offensive operation, a major counter-offensive operation, with the purpose to recapture the territories on the western bank of the river of Nitrius. So this is the river of Nitrius, and according to information we have, the Ukrainians are trying to recapture this territory and to remove the pressure from the Russian side on the main logistic lines that go from the mainland, from the Kharkiv area, in the direction of the city of Borova and in the direction of this pocket. The Ukrainians are trying to maintain these territories, to recapture all these territories, and to force the Russians to fall back on the eastern bank of the river of Nitrius. The Russians are saying that there is a very big amount of Ukrainians, too many Ukrainians, lots of vehicles. The Ukrainians using all means they have with the purpose to recapture these territories, and the Russians are preparing themselves to repel these attacks in coming days. lots of clashes will be recorded through this area. So this is something like the northern Liman counter-offensive operation, and the Ukrainians are doing this counter-offensive operation with the purpose not to allow the Russians to finish the battle for the city of Liman itself, not to allow the Russians to improve their logistics, and the Ukrainians are trying to improve their logistics from their side, and once again to win some time and to postpone the battle for the Slaviansk-Konstantinovka agglomeration for as far as possible. As for the northern directions, the Russians during the previous 24 hours improved their positions along the river of Volcha. The changes were recorded through the settlement of Budarki. The changes were recorded around the village of Akhrimovka. Furthermore, according to information we have, the changes were recorded along the village of Granev. This is already the Kazachye Lopan direction. These are the changes on the ground, and the most important thing, the changes were recorded through the Sumy direction. As for the Sumy direction, we have lots of very interesting updates. First of all, the Russians intensify their activities in this area, trying to attack as many as possible Ukrainian positions. And the most important thing, that it seems that the battle for Zapsilia to the west of Melitopol is about to be ended. And the most important thing, according to several pro-Russian sources, the Russians began battle for the settlement of Ivolzhanskaya. First, sabotage and reconnaissance groups or stormtroopers of the armed force of the Russian Federation entered the territory, and the clashes currently are taking place through the settlement of Ivolzhanskaya. The Russians with this offensive are trying to cut the second defense layer into pieces, the villages of Khotyn and Pisarevka to the west, and the villages of Kanitsa, Novosechia and Krapivshina to the east. And then Russians, when they finish this operation, will try to handle with every single part of this defense line separately, which means that the Sumy offensive operation is intensifying significantly. The Russians also continue bombings of the northern Sumy direction along M3 road, where, according to Zelensky, the Russians and the Belarusians are preparing the northern offensive operation. In this video, we can see several temporary deployment points were destroyed as a result of attacks. So let's wait and see what is going to happen next, but most likely this upcoming night is going to be very difficult. And that's it for today. The Military Summary channel reminds we condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for your watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.